What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off, rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. Story 1. The things we drowned always return. The cigarette was still breathing. A thin ribbon of smoke curled upward from the crystal tray on Celeste's desk, twisting slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Her heart forgot its rhythm. That was impossible. She had personally replaced every lock in the building 3 nights ago. She remembered the metallic click, the weight of the new keys in her hand, the way she'd pulled on the door twice before leaving just to be certain. No one else had access. No one. And yet there it was. A Dunhill International, Garrison's favorite. Her stomach tightened. She leaned closer, her fingers trembling as she lifted it. The filter was crushed in the exact same place he used to bite, a nervous habit he'd never broken. It was still warm. The security system hadn't recorded a single entry after midnight. Not one. She had been the last person here. She was sure of it. Wasn't she? The question slid into her mind like a blade. Lately, her thoughts had been betraying her. Names slipped away mid-sentence. Entire conversations vanished. She'd walk into rooms and forget why she came. The cardiologist had warned her the medication could cloud things temporarily, soften the edges of memory. But this didn't feel soft. This felt precise, personal. Outside, the coastal fog clung to the windows, turning the towering fir trees into pale ghosts. The world beyond the glass looked unreal, like something half remembered from a dream. She stared at the cigarette in her hand. She had watched the cleaning staff empty the tray yesterday evening. She remembered the hollow sound of glass against glass as they carried it away. She checked her watch. 7:45 a.m. Too early. Too quiet. Too wrong. Unless she had emptied it herself and forgotten. Unless it had been here all along, hiding in plain sight. Unless something inside her was breaking exactly the way he said it would. Her jaw tightened. He used to say that during fights, calm, certain, cruel. "You're losing yourself," he'd whisper, like he was delivering a diagnosis, just like your mother. She could still hear it, still feel the way those words had settled into her bones. From across the courtyard, the psychiatric wing stirred to life. Pipes groaned. Water rushed. A television murmured to itself. Applause from an audience that didn't exist here echoed faintly through the walls. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But today, they felt like background noise in someone else's nightmare. The clinic had been her family's legacy. Acres of aging architecture wrapped in forest and fog. It had survived wars, recessions, and decades of slow decay. It should have survived her marriage. But she had miscalculated him. Some mistakes don't announce themselves when they begin. They bloom quietly. By the time you see them clearly, they've already poisoned everything. Her phone buzzed on the desk. 3 missed calls. Thalia. The head nurse. Celeste frowned. Thalia hadn't been the same since the night at the lake. She still showed up, still did her job. But something had shifted. Distance, not absence. Distance meant intention. Celeste knew the difference. She built her career studying the space between guilt and fear. They looked identical from the outside, but they were not the same. She placed the cigarette inside her desk drawer, then froze. What was she doing? Hiding it, protecting it. From who? From herself. Her pulse quickened. She pulled the drawer open again and stared at it. Evidence. That was the word. Evidence that someone had been here. Evidence that the new locks meant nothing. Evidence that Garrison wasn't finished with her. He had always preferred psychological warfare. Break the mind and the rest follows. Her fingers tightened around the filter. And that's when she saw it. A faint smear of lipstick. Not bold, not obvious, but unmistakable. Her breath caught. Garrison never wore lipstick. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded. Slowly, terribly. Someone else had been sitting in her chair. Someone else had stood in her office. Someone else had smoked his cigarette. And they hadn't bothered to hide it. They wanted her to find it. Someone had been sitting in her office, sitting in her chair, breathing her air, smoking his cigarettes, and leaving the remains behind like a signature. Or, the thought hit harder than the others. Maybe none of that had happened. Maybe she had carried it in herself, stuck to the sole of her shoe, tangled in the fibers of her coat. Maybe her mind, desperate for order, had built an entire explanation around something meaningless. She had caught herself doing that before, finding meaning in accidents, seeing intention in coincidence. It was the curse of knowing too much. Her training had taught her every symptom of a mind turning against itself. It had given her the vocabulary for paranoia, the clinical distance to observe it. But it had also taken away her certainty. Because now, even her awareness could not be trusted. Even her doubt could be a symptom. The intercom exploded to life. The sudden crackle shattered the silence, and her hand froze inches from the console. Static flooded the speaker. Then, breathing, slow, heavy, wet, not mechanical, human. She didn't move, didn't speak. She waited. The breathing continued, calm, patient, like whoever was on the other end knew she would listen. She counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. By 12, her finger hovered over the response button. She stopped herself. No. Let them speak first. Her pulse slammed against her ribs, too fast, too violent. Her doctor's warning echoed faintly in her mind, but it felt irrelevant now. The breathing stopped. Silence fell. And then, his voice, soft, close, poisoned with familiarity. You told me once you were afraid of drowning. Her blood turned to ice. You said it felt like her hands around your throat. The line went dead. The world collapsed inward. Those words. She had given those words to him. A lifetime ago. In darkness. In trust. She remembered the night with painful clarity. The safety she had believed in. His hand moving gently through her hair as he promised protection. But he hadn't protected her. He had preserved it, stored it, saved it for later. Like ammunition. Her legs refused to hold her weight. The office door stood across the room, locked, bolted, impenetrable. The windows revealed nothing but fog and forest. No one could have reached her. No one should have been able to speak to her. And yet, he had. She gripped the desk, grounding herself in something solid. The wood was real. The cigarette was real. The voice had been real. But Garrison wasn't. He couldn't be. Because she remembered killing him. Not in fragments. Not in doubt. In certainty. She remembered the tank. The still black water. His body fighting at first. Then weakening. Then stopping. She remembered the exact moment his resistance vanished. The silence afterward. The terrible quiet. She remembered Thalia beside her. Calm, efficient, prepared. She remembered being given something to swallow, something to steady her, something that softened the edges of horror. After that, the memories fractured, pieces without sequence, plastic, weight, cold air, the smell of the lake, chains, so many chains. She remembered being in the boat, remembered the sound of something entering the water. But the moment itself, the final moment, it was missing, gone, like it had been erased. At the time, she had been grateful for that. Now the absence terrified her, because the police had found nothing. No body, no chains, no evidence of anything beneath the surface. The tank had been empty the next morning. Dry, sterile, clean, as if it had never held death at all. Her breathing became shallow, uneven. Had she done it? Or had she only believed she had? Had Thalia helped her hide a body? Or helped her create a memory? The cigarette, the voice, the impossible presence. These were not accidents. They were messages. Someone knew. Someone was rebuilding that night piece by piece, tearing open wounds she had tried to bury. But only one person alive knew the truth. Only one. Thalia. Thalia, who had walked into her office months ago with photographs that could have destroyed everything. Photographs of betrayal, of secrets, of leverage. Thalia, who had looked at her not with fear, but with control. Celeste had always believed she knew exactly who Thalia was. A careful woman, a professional, the kind who followed rules because rules kept the world from falling apart. But that certainty had died the day Thalia walked into this office and closed the door behind her. She had been crying, not politely, not gracefully. Her face had collapsed under the weight of something she could no longer contain. She told Celeste everything, how Garrison had singled her out, how he had been patient, charming, careful, how he had turned attention into affection and affection into obligation, how he had promised freedom, promised love, promised escape. And when she tried to leave, he promised ruin. Celeste remembered sitting perfectly still, handing her tissues with steady hands, even as something inside her was tearing open. Because she recognized the pattern. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had repeated himself, collected another victim. By the time Thalia finished speaking, neither of them needed to say it aloud. Some problems didn't have peaceful endings. Some problems had to be removed. Permanently. The planning had been quiet, methodical, almost sterile. They spoke about it the same way Celeste discussed treatments with patients, calmly, rationally, as if they were solving an equation instead of ending a life. The deprivation tank had been Thalia's idea. Fitting, she'd said. A man who thrived on controlling minds, erased in silence. They rehearsed it, waited, and when the night came, he walked in exactly as predicted. Suspicious, drunk, certain he was still the one in control. He hadn't fought the way Celeste expected. That was the worst part. His strength dissolved too quickly. His body surrendered too easily. The water closed over him. The bubbles slowed, stopped, and just like that, he was gone. Celeste had braced herself for guilt, for horror, for unbearable remorse. Instead, she felt free. The relief had been so complete it terrified her. And now, that relief was being taken away. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she called Thalia. The answer came instantly, as if she'd been waiting. Celeste told her to come. Nothing more. Minutes later, Thalia stood in the doorway, perfectly composed. Almost, but Celeste saw through it now. The tension in her shoulders, the tremor in her fingers as she locked the door. Celeste showed her the cigarette. Thalia's face emptied of color. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and placed 2 more on the desk. Same brand, same crushed filters. Her voice barely held together as she explained where she'd found them. Somewhere only she could access. They stared at each other, not as allies, not anymore. Something had shifted, something dangerous. The intercom screamed to life again. Both of them flinched, but this time, it wasn't breathing. It was water, a hollow sloshing sound. Celeste's blood turned cold. She knew that sound. She would never forget it. Then his voice came, warped, distant, accusing, turning them against each other, suggesting betrayal, poisoning what little trust remained. The silence that followed was worse. Thalia broke first. Her denial came too fast, too rehearsed. Celeste felt something harden inside her. Before she could speak, darkness swallowed the room. The lights were gone. Everything vanished. The office, the walls, the world. She was back in the tank, back in the lake, back in that endless black. Her chest tightened violently. Her heart stumbled. She needed her medication. Now, her hands searched blindly across the desk. Paper, ceramic, glass, heat. She froze. The ashtray. It was warm. Not fatting warmth. Fresh warmth. Alive warmth. As if someone had just put something out seconds ago. The lights snapped back. Thalia was pressed against the door, shaking, her face streaked with tears. Celeste looked down. Her breath stopped. 3 cigarettes rested in the tray, perfectly aligned, still smoking. Her hand jerked away. She hadn't put them there. She hadn't moved. Slowly, she became aware of Thalia staring past her. Not at her. Behind her. Thalia's face had changed. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Celeste turned and realized they were no longer alone. The window was crying. Tiny beads of moisture clung to the inside of the glass behind her desk, trembling as if they'd only just formed. Celeste stared at them, her mind refusing to understand. Condensation didn't form there. Not on the inside. Not in this temperature. Not in this room. And yet, it wasn't the moisture that stopped her breathing. It was the words carved into it. Someone had traced them slowly, deliberately, with a human finger. Lake Crescent 3:00 a.m. The letters sagged under their own weight, thin streams running downward like melting skin. Her mouth went dry. That was the time. The exact time. The moment her memory fractured. The moment the lake swallowed everything. Unless her stomach twisted. Unless she had written it. Unless she had walked here in some half-conscious state, dragged her finger across the glass, and left herself a message she didn't remember creating. Her medication caused dreams. Real ones. Ones that bled into waking. Her doctor had warned her. Stress could fracture perception. Make the mind protect itself. She could have done this. She could have built all of it. The cigarettes. The voice. The evidence. Punishing herself. Confessing without meaning to. Her hand moved before she could stop it. She touched the wet letters. The moisture clung to her skin. Without thinking, she brought her finger closer. The smell hit instantly. Salt. Not clean. Not sterile. Raw. Natural. Lake water. Not just any water. That lake. She knew its composition, had memorized it during those sleepless nights after. Her chest seized. Pressure crushed inward, squeezing her heart in a merciless grip. Pain exploded through her ribs. Her vision collapsed into a narrow tunnel. Her purse. She needed her purse. Her hands fumbled blindly until they found the small orange bottle. She forced one tablet beneath her tongue. It dissolved instantly. Across the room, Thalia watched. Not rushing. Not helping. Observing. Evaluating. Like a nurse deciding whether intervention was necessary or deserved. Seconds crawled past. The pain loosened. Her vision widened. Her heart slowed enough to keep her alive. Thalia hadn't moved. Not once. Celeste looked at her. Really looked at her. And understood. Leave. The word came out cold. Final. Relief flooded Thalia's face before she could hide it. She didn't argue. Didn't hesitate. She unlocked the door and stepped out, sealing Celeste inside with a quiet click. Alone again. Celeste's phone vibrated. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Unknown number. One message. The tank is full again. Her hands went numb. No. They had drained it. Scrubbed it. Destroyed it. She stared at the words, waiting for them to change. They didn't. Another vibration. A photograph. Her breath stopped. The deprivation tank. Dark. Filled. Water pressed against the small circular window. And inside, something suspended. Human-shaped. Motionless. The timestamp glowed beneath it. 7:58 a.m. 2 minutes ago. This wasn't memory. This wasn't imagination. This was now. Her legs refused to cooperate. Her body remembered drowning, even if her mind didn't. But something stronger pulled at her. Something she couldn't resist. Truth or punishment. She forced herself to stand. The room tilted. Her legs trembled. But they didn't collapse. Somewhere beneath her, in the depths of the clinic, something was waiting. She stepped out of her office and locked it behind her. Once, then again. Her fingers tugged the handle harder than necessary, as if force alone could guarantee reality would stay in place. The hallway stretched before her, empty and silent. Too early for anyone else. Too early for witnesses. The elevator waited at the far end, its ancient metal cage humming faintly, as if alive and listening. She didn't trust it. Didn't trust being trapped. Didn't trust anything enclosed. She turned toward the stairwell instead. Each step downward felt heavier than the last. The air changed as she descended. Colder. Thicker. Wrong. By the time she reached the basement, her breath came out in faint white clouds. That wasn't possible. She kept the temperature, regulated herself. Her pulse quickened. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, stuttering in uneven bursts. The deprivation tank waited in the corner. Silent, patient, its smooth white surface reflected her approach. She barely recognized herself. Her face looked hollow, skin clinging too tightly to bone. When had that happened? When had she started disappearing? She stepped closer, closer, until her face hovered inches from the small circular window. Inside, darkness, complete. but not silent. Water shifted within. A slow, heavy movement. Something displacing it. Her heart slammed. The lights died. Instantly. Total black. She gasped and stumbled backward, her hands slamming against cold concrete. Her breathing filled the room. Too loud. Too fast. She tried to remember where the stairs were. Left. Right. Behind her. The darkness swallowed direction. Then, a drop. Water striking concrete. Another. Closer. Faster. Her blood froze. And then she heard it. The sound she would never forget. The mechanical release. The tank opening. She ran. Blind. Desperate. Her hands scraped walls, pipes. One burned her palm with sudden heat. Behind her. Splashing. Water spilling. Something moving. Following. The emergency light snapped on. Red. Dim. Barely enough. She turned. The lid stood open. Water spread across the floor toward her feet. But inside the tank, nothing. Empty. Dry. Impossible. She looked down. The puddle touched her shoes. She felt the cold seep through the fabric. It was real, but it had come from nowhere. Her mind broke. She ran. She didn't stop until she reached the security office. Didn't stop until she saw the footage. The screen glowed in the dark room. The timestamp read 8:02 a.m. There she was, walking into the basement. Alive. Solid. Real. She leaned closer, watching herself approach the tank, watching herself stand in front of it, watching herself freeze. Seconds passed. On the screen, nothing else happened. No darkness. No opening lid. No flooding water. Just Celeste, standing there, alone. Then, on the video, her body jerked suddenly, like she'd been startled, like something had touched her. But there was nothing there. Nothing visible. Nothing human. She watched herself stumble backward. And then, the footage glitched, just for a fraction of a second, but long enough to see it. A shape, standing behind her, tall, still, watching, exactly where nothing should have been. The footage didn't lie. Celeste sat frozen beside Ortiz, her eyes locked on the glowing monitor. There she was, standing in the basement, alone. The tank in front of her remained sealed the entire time. No lid opening, no water spilling, no impossible flood. Just her, breathing, starring, breaking. After 37 seconds, the version of herself on the screen suddenly recoiled and ran. Ran from nothing. Ortiz didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence carried the quiet compassion of a man who had spent decades watching minds betray their owners. He wasn't seeing a threat. He was seeing a patient. Celeste forced herself to speak. She asked about the other cameras. Ortiz leaned back slowly, his joints creaking with the movement. He explained the system was ancient, older than both of them. There were gaps, places the cameras couldn't reach, utility tunnels, maintenance passages, forgotten spaces between walls. Someone who knew the building well could move freely without ever being seen. The words settled heavily in her chest. Someone who knew the building. Someone like him. Garrison had spent years here. Years learning its secrets. years learning hers. Her stomach turned. She left the security room and found Thalia in the medication storage. The nurse stood with her back turned, counting tablets with mechanical precision. She didn't look up, but her hands stopped. They both knew. Celeste spoke first. She asked about messages. Unknown numbers. Silence stretched between them. Then Thalia turned. Her face had lost whatever strength it once held. She said yes. 3 messages. The first had been a photograph of his keys. The same keys found in the abandoned boat. The second showed the maintenance shed, the place where they had taken the chains. The third, Thalia hesitated. Her voice weakened. It was only words. A single accusation. You killed an innocent man. Celeste felt her heart stutter. Innocent. The word carved straight through her. Because it didn't just accuse. It transformed. It stripped away their justification. Turned survival into murder. Turned them into something unforgivable. She stared at Thalia. Both of them standing in the ruins of their certainty. Someone knew everything. Someone who understood the details. Someone who could reach them anywhere. Someone who didn't need cameras, or doors, or permission. A terrible realization began to grow inside her. This wasn't random. This wasn't haunting. This was deliberate, precise, engineered. Psychological pressure applied slowly, carefully, until one of them broke, until one of them confessed, until one of them destroyed the other. Her eyes remained fixed on Thalia, and for the first time since the lake, she understood the most dangerous possibility of all. The person doing this might already be standing in the room. Psychological torture didn't need ropes. It only needed patience. And whoever was doing this understood her perfectly. They knew her heart was fragile. They knew her mind was cracking. They knew exactly where to press. Celeste stood in the medication room doorway, watching Thalia. 3 feet away, close enough to see every movement, close enough to notice what had changed. Thalia's hands were steady now. No tremor, no fear, just calm repetition as she counted pills. Control had returned. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Celeste said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. She turned and walked out. The drive home blurred into fragments. Dark trees leaning too close to the road. Fog swallowing distance. The world reduced to whatever existed directly in front of her. Everything else gone. Like memory, her house waited at the end of the driveway. Silent, still, except the lights were on. She froze. She didn't remember leaving them on. But memory had betrayed her before. She stepped out of the car slowly. The air felt heavier here. She entered through the garage and punched in the security code. The system disarmed with a soft chime. Inside, something was wrong. Not broken, not disturbed, just used, like the air had been breathed by someone else. She moved carefully into the living room and stopped. Someone was sitting in his chair. Her body shut down. Her heart exploded into chaos. For one impossible second, she believed it was him. Garrison returned, watching her, waiting. Her vision began to collapse. Her purse slipped from her shoulder. She couldn't breathe. The figure stood, stepped forward, and the illusion broke. Not Garrison, but close enough to hurt. Younger, harder, his nephew. Bradley. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not grief, not confusion, certainty. He said Garrison had come to him weeks before disappearing. Afraid, suspicious, preparing. He had been gathering proof, recording, documenting, planning for the possibility he wouldn't survive. Bradley's voice kept moving, explaining, accusing. He said he knew something had happened. He said the story didn't make sense. He said she had been the last person to see him. He asked the question, the only question, where is he? Her heart stuttered violently. Pain shot down her arm. Her fingers clawed uselessly at empty air. Her medication. She needed it. Now, Bradley's voice distorted. The room tilted sideways. The floor rushed up. And everything went black. The floor should have hurt. It didn't. Pain had lost its meaning beneath the crushing weight inside her chest. Her body was shutting down. Her vision dimmed to a narrow tunnel. The last thing she saw was Bradley, standing over her, calm, focused. He pulled out his phone and dialed. His voice was steady, professional. Reporting her collapse like it was nothing more than routine. Then he stepped past her, not toward her, away, leaving her behind, leaving her to be found, leaving her to die if her heart decided it was finished. Darkness took her, but she woke in artificial light, bright, unforgiving. The smell hit first, antiseptic, bleach, death held at bay by chemicals. A hospital. Her arm was tethered by an IV line. Machines surrounded her, translating her heartbeat into fragile electronic signals. Too fast, too uneven. A nurse entered, checked numbers, wrote something down, and left without meeting her eyes. Celeste tried to sit up. Agony answered instantly. Her chest burned. Her strength vanished. She fell back. Moments later, her cardiologist appeared. Dr. Raines. Her voice was calm, practiced, the voice of someone used to delivering bad news gently. The episode had been severe. Her heart had nearly stopped. They had pulled her back. But damage remained. Permanent damage. Stress was killing her. Not metaphorically. Literally. If it continued, her next collapse would likely be her last. The solution sounded simple. Remove the stress. Remove the cause. Celeste almost laughed. Because how do you remove something when you don't know if it's real? She asked about Bradley. The doctor frowned, confused. She said no one by that name had called the ambulance. A neighbor had found her. Outside, near her car. The neighbor mentioned someone else had been there earlier. Someone who helped move her into the open. But they had left before help arrived. Vanished, like they had never existed. Celeste stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts unraveled. Had Bradley really been there? Had she invented him? Her mind scrambling for explanation as her heart failed. Had she imagined the confrontation, the accusation, the certainty in his eyes? Or had he simply erased himself? Like everything else, the doctor told her she would stay overnight. Observation, monitoring, survival. When she was alone again, she reached for her phone. 7 missed calls, all from Thalia. 3 messages. Where are you? We need to talk. And then, the last one. It was different. Short. Final. He isn't dead. Celeste's hands trembled as she called Thalia back. The answer came instantly. Too instantly. As if Thalia had been staring at the phone, waiting for it to light up. Her voice came through thin and tight. "He's alive." Celeste stopped breathing. "He's alive," Thalia repeated. "I saw him." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. They had watched him die. They had held him beneath the surface. Waited for the fight to end. Waited for the stillness. Waited for the silence. They had checked. They had been certain. Celeste forced her voice to work. "That's not possible." Thalia ignored her. She spoke faster now. She said she had gone back to the clinic. She couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking. The tank was full again. And when she looked inside, she saw his face, pressed against the glass, eyes open, watching her. His mouth was moving, trying to speak. Celeste's mind rebelled. "It's a trick," she whispered. "Someone is doing this to us." "I opened it," Thalia said. Silence swallowed the line. "It was empty," she finished. The call died. Celeste stared at the phone. Called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. Her heart pounded harder. Faster. She tore the IV from her arm. Pain flared. Blood ran down her skin. Machine screamed. The nurse rushed in. Celeste was already moving. Already standing. Already leaving. The nurse tried to stop her. Celeste pushed past. Not with violence. With certainty. Because something had shifted. This wasn't random. This was planned. Every message. Every voice. Every impossible moment. Someone was pushing them. Driving them. Toward something final. She made it outside. Made it to her car. Then her strength collapsed. She caught herself against the door. Her chest burned. Her lungs refused air. She swallowed another tablet. Waited. Nothing changed. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. His voice came through clear. No distortion. No distance. Just him. Calm. Certain. "You can still fix this," he said. Her blood froze. "Come to the clinic," he continued. "The tank." A pause. Alone. The call ended. Celeste sat in the hospital parking lot, her hand pressed against her failing heart. Two paths. One ended at the police station. Confession. Truth. Punishment. Peace. The other led back to the clinic. Back to the tank. Back to him. She started the car. Drove. The police station appeared ahead. Close. Waiting. She slowed. 3 blocks away. She turned the wheel. Because this was her life. Her legacy. Her prison. And she would not let him, or whoever wore his voice, take it from her. Narrowing tunneled down to the edges of panic. Every inhale burned. Every heartbeat rattled her ribs like they might shatter. Garrison crouched closer, close enough that the scent of wet wood and iron, like water, cigarettes, something else, burned through her senses. "You think it's over," he said, voice low, almost casual. "That what you believed, what you did, would erase me." Celeste couldn't answer. Her tongue felt too heavy, too useless. Her mind screamed, 1,000 fragments of fear and disbelief colliding at once. Thalia stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the warmth of betrayal radiating from her like a physical force. Her face had lost its humanity, sharpened into something alien, calculating. "We've been patient," she said, almost serene, "but you needed to see it for yourself." Celeste's chest seized again, waves of pain stabbing through her ribs. Her knees threatened to buckle and she sank, catching herself on trembling hands. Her eyes darted to the tank, the place that had haunted her dreams, the nightmare she had tried to scrub clean. Empty, impossibly empty. Garrison leaned closer, voice teasing like a predator circling. You thought you controlled this place, your life, your mind. But look at you now, trembling, broken, chained by what you think you remember. The horror wasn't just in him, wasn't just in Thalia. It was in the precision, the way they had orchestrated every doubt, every impossible moment, every pulse of terror in her chest. They hadn't needed to touch her, they had already owned her mind. She tried to rise, tried to step back, but the floor felt alien beneath her. Concrete, too cold, too solid, yet not enough to anchor her in reality. Every fiber of her body screamed flight, yet her legs betrayed her. Garrison's smile widened, the edges cruel and knowing. Do you see now? He whispered, wet droplets from his hair flicking her arm. Everything you feared, everything you thought was gone, was never gone. It was waiting, watching, learning. Thalia tilted her head, silent now, letting him speak, letting Celeste drown in disbelief and dread. The room narrowed to their presence, their control, the impossibility of her survival. And in that moment she understood. The fight wasn't against them, not entirely. It was against the unraveling of her own mind, the heart she had fought to protect, the legacy she had tried to uphold. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every breath a decision. And in that cold basement with wet shadows stretching across the walls, Celeste knew there would be no easy victory, only survival, and even survival would demand everything she had left. Was 17, 15 years of silent preparation, of gathering proof, of waiting for the perfect moment to strike back at the man who had stolen her life. Thalia had carried the weight of that injustice like a coiled spring, and now, in this basement, she was finally releasing it. Celeste's chest tightened again, but this time the terror was tempered by a fragile clarity. She could see it now, the pattern, the manipulation, the lies, but it wasn't enough to steady her body. Her heartbeat thundered, each pulse a warning of how close she was to collapse, how close Garrison's cruelty had brought her. Garrison froze, finally understanding that the game had ended before it had even begun. His confident grin faltered as he scanned the basement, his eyes catching the first flashes of uniformed officers descending the stairs. Celeste saw the shift in his posture, the sudden tension in his shoulders, the sharp intake of breath. Fear. Real, palpable fear. Thalia stepped forward, device in hand, unwavering. You manipulated, you destroyed, you faked your death, and you thought no one would remember, no one would ever fight back. 15 years, Garrison. 15 years of silence, and it ends tonight. The officers reached the basement, flashlights cutting through the gloom, voices commanding, presence undeniable. Garrison's eyes darted, realizing escape was impossible. He looked back at Celeste, as if searching for some shred of the terrified woman he'd haunted. But the woman before him was battered, shaking, heart racing, yet alive. The psychological grip he had wielded for years shattered under the weight of evidence, authority, and the reckoning Thalia had orchestrated. Every impossibility, every manipulated heartbeat, every ghostly message had been part of his empire of fear. But now, that empire crumbled. Celeste sank to the floor, knees weak, hands trembling, finally allowing herself to breathe. The terror still lingered in her chest, but it was joined by something else. Relief, clarity, survival. She had endured the impossible, confronted the manipulator, and lived. Thalia placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. It's over, she said softly, though her eyes burned with the memory of years stolen. He can't touch us anymore. Celeste's gaze shifted to the empty tank, the dark, waterless chamber that had once symbolized despair, now a silent witness to justice. Every fear, every hallucination, every pulse of terror had led her here to survival, to truth, to the reckoning of a monster finally revealed. Her heart still pounded, but each beat was hers, each breath hers. The nightmare had ended, not with death, but with the knowledge that she had endured, that she had survived. And as the officers moved to take Garrison into custody, Celeste finally allowed herself to exhale. The room was quiet, save for the distant hum of the clinic's old fluorescent lights. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like it had all those years ago. But inside, Celeste felt a fragile, astonishing clarity. She had survived the impossible, faced her demons, and the legacy she had fought for, her clinic, her life, her mind, remained intact. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself stand. Steady, trembling, scarred, but undeniably alive. 100 times before blurred into a white haze. Each motion jolted her chest, each bump a reminder of the fragility she had survived. Outside, sirens still screamed, but inside, the chaos had become background noise to a single, resonant truth. The nightmare that had haunted her for months was over. Celeste's thoughts drifted briefly to Garrison, trapped now, accountable, powerless, and to Thalia, who had orchestrated a years-long plan for justice with surgical precision. The clinic, the inheritance, the legacy her mother had built, all of it was finally hers, untainted, uncontested. She had endured manipulation, hallucination, threats to life and mind, and yet she was still here. The paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, the fluorescent lights of the clinic fading behind her, replaced by the red and blue blur of the city at night. Each heartbeat was still a hammer, but no longer a weapon aimed at her mind, only her body reminding her she was alive. Somewhere in the background, she heard radios reporting the arrest, the evidence, the investigation. But she didn't listen. She didn't need to. Celeste closed her eyes and let the ambulance's movement rock her, the steady hum a lullaby after months of terror. Survival was the only victory that mattered now. And as the doors closed behind her, she allowed herself a thought she hadn't dared for months. She was free. Not just from Garrison, not just from fear, but from the chains of doubt and guilt that had nearly destroyed her. For the first time in a long time, Celeste breathed, not just to live, but to exist, fully and unbroken, in a world that had tried to take everything. The nightmare had ended, and for once, she could step forward into the quiet, fragile, and hard-won peace of morning. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw water. Not the clinic, not the tank. The lake, black, silent, waiting. Her pulse stumbled at the memory, not from pain this time, but from clarity. Thalia had never lost control, not once. Every tremor, every tear, every confession had been measured, designed, delivered like medicine with a hidden poison. Celeste had thought she was fighting for survival, but she had been part of someone else's cure. The ambulance turned, tires humming against wet pavement. The paramedic said something, but his voice sounded far away, like it was reaching her through deep water. The clinic was hers, legally, physically, but stripped. Empty accounts, empty trust, empty certainty. She wondered, not for the first time, whether that was the real revenge. Not prison for Garrison, not justice for Thalia. But this, survival with nothing, survival with memory. Her hand drifted weakly to her chest. Beneath bone and bruised muscle, her heart continued its stubborn, damaged rhythm. Proof, punishment, inheritance. She thought of her mother, of the clinic in its early days, of cracked ceiling tiles and leaking pipes nobody fixed because the work itself had mattered more than appearances. She could rebuild it. Walls were easier to repair than people. The ambulance slowed. Sirens faded. And in that quiet space between what had been taken and what remained, Celeste understood something with cold, surgical precision. Trust had nearly killed her. Love had nearly killed her. Guilt had nearly killed her. But it hadn't. Her eyes opened. Fluorescent light flooded back in. Harsh, unforgiving, real. She was still here. Not innocent. Not whole. But alive. And somewhere in another airport in another city, a woman with a stolen fortune and a stolen past was also alive. Somewhere in a police car, a man who had tried to erase her was learning what it meant to lose. The paramedic asked her name again. This time, Celeste answered without hesitation. Because whatever came next, trial, surgery, ruin, or rebuilding, it would belong to her. The mask, the version of reality that made survival easier to accept. Celeste let her fingers rest limp in Rebecca's grasp. Weak, harmless, human. It was a useful illusion. The ambulance slowed as it approached the emergency entrance. Bright lights spilled through the rear windows, washing everything in sterile white. Rebecca's voice sharpened, calling ahead, listing vitals, conditions, history. Words like arrhythmia, cardiac trauma, attempted homicide. Words that reduced the last 2 weeks of her life into clinical fragments. They opened the doors. Cold air rushed in. Hands lifted her. Voices multiplied. But Celeste's attention drifted somewhere else. Not to Garrison in handcuffs. Not to Thalia disappearing through airport terminals. Not even to the clinic waiting in fog. But to the tank. Empty. Always empty. It had never held Garrison. It had held her. Her fear. Her guilt. Her willingness. That was the real secret. Not that she had tried to kill him, but that she had been able to. That capacity lived in her now like a second heart, quieter, stronger, immortal. They wheeled her through automatic doors. Fluorescent lights passed overhead in perfect, repeating intervals. A metronome counting out whatever remained of the person she had been before the lake. Rebecca stayed beside her, still holding her hand, still believing. Celeste turned her head slightly on the pillow, studied her, young, earnest, unbroken. For now, Celeste wondered what it would take to break her. Not because she planned to, but because she knew now that everyone could be. Given the right betrayal, given the right loss, given the right moment at the edge of survival. They pushed her into surgery. Masks descended. Voices softened. Darkness approached again. But this time, Celeste did not fear it. Because she understood something she hadn't before. The most dangerous thing in that clinic had never been the tank, had never been Garrison, had never been Thalia. It had been the woman who was willing to look into emptiness and not look away. In the quiet between heartbeats, Celeste built her future the same way she built everything else. Piece by piece, lie by lie, truth by carefully edited truth. The cardiac unit hummed around her. Machines whispered. Rubber soles squeaked across polished floors. Somewhere, someone cried out and was silenced by sedation. Life and death negotiated in fluorescent light. Her phone rested against her ribs. The message to her lawyer had already been delivered. Soon there would be more messages. Insurance representatives, board members, accountants, contractors. New locks, new cameras, no blind spots. Never again. They believed she was resting, recovering, weak. She let them believe it. Her eyes stayed closed, her breathing slow and shallow, the performance effortless now. Because weakness was the safest disguise. Thalia had proven that. Garrison had proven that. Even her mother had proven that, long ago, with hands that had held her under bathwater just long enough to teach the lesson. Control was oxygen. Without it, you drowned. With it, you decided who didn't breathe. A nurse adjusted her IV. Another checked her chart. They spoke softly, respectfully, about her like she was fragile glass. Not one of them knew they were standing beside something forged in pressure. something that had already died once and chosen to live anyway. Celeste counted another heartbeat. And another. Steady now. Damaged, but obedient. She thought of the clinic emerging from fog each morning. Its windows dark. Its halls empty. Waiting. It would open again. Patients would arrive with their secrets, their weaknesses, their desperate hope that someone could fix them. She would welcome them. She would listen. She would heal them. Or she would teach them how to survive. Those were not the same thing. Her lawyer would build her defense. Garrison would face trial. Thalia would vanish into whatever new life she purchased. And Celeste would remain. She opened her eyes, just slightly, enough to see her reflection in the black screen of her phone. Pale, older, but still there, still breathing, still in control. She watched that reflection without comfort, without guilt, without illusion, because she understood now, with absolute certainty. The water had never been the enemy. The drowning had never been the tragedy. The tragedy had been believing she wasn't capable of holding someone else beneath the surface. Her heart beat again, and this time she smiled. Story 2, we kept what should have rotted. Daniel did not unwrap it immediately. Protocol existed for a reason. Objects carried history. History carried consequence. He set the bundle on the examination table beneath the conservation lamp. Light pooled over the hide, revealing hair follicles like tiny black pinpricks. The modeling wasn't random. It formed gradients, patterns, almost like bruising. He told himself that was impossible. He reached for his camera again, zoomed closer. The sinew binding the bundle had been tied in deliberate intervals, each not identical, precise, ritualistic, not decorative, restrictive. He logged the observation. Binding pattern suggests containment rather than presentation. He paused after writing that. Containment. He stared at the word longer than necessary. Outside, the museum settled into evening. Old buildings breathed when temperature changed. Wood creaked, pipes clicked. He'd learned to ignore it. Mostly. He slid a scalpel beneath the first sinew loop. Hesitated. The delivery driver's shaking hands came back to him. Ridiculous. He cut. The sinew didn't snap. It parted with a soft sound. Not the dry crack of ancient fiber. Something quieter. Something wetter. Daniel froze. He leaned closer. A smell escaped the opening scene. Not rot. Not exactly. Earth. Deep earth. The kind that never saw sunlight. He swallowed and continued. Loop by loop, he cut the bindings. With each one removed, the hide loosened. Relaxed, like muscles unclenching. His mouth had gone dry. He told himself this was projection, anthropomorphism. The human brain imposed life on lifeless things. He made another note. Organic odor present, source unknown. When the final binding fell away, the hide opened slightly on its own. Just a fraction. Enough to reveal darkness inside. Not stuffing. Not artifact padding. Space. Hollow space. Daniel leaned closer. And heard it. A sound. So faint he thought at first it was the building again. A slow, thick movement. Like something shifting in mud. His scalp prickled. He forced himself to look. Inside the hide. Something moved. He stumbled backward, knocking into the supply cart. Metal instruments clattered to the floor. The bundle lay still. Silent. Open. Empty. He stared at it, waiting. Nothing happened. Minutes passed. His breathing slowed. "You're tired," he told himself. "You're projecting. You need sleep." He approached again. Slowly, carefully, he used the scalpel tip to lift the hide edge. Inside was nothing. No bones. No ceremonial object. No remains. Just the interior surface of the hide. Smooth, dark, and lined with shallow grooves. Parallel, curving, like the inside of a throat. He recoiled. His heart pounded now. He laughed. A short, brittle sound. "Stop it," he said aloud. His voice sounded small in the conservation lab. He wrapped the hide closed again. He did not rebind it. He told himself he would continue tomorrow. He turned off the lamp, left the bundle on the table, and locked the lab door behind him. But that night, Daniel dreamed of breathing underground. Not suffocating. Breathing. Slow. Patient. Waiting. But he woke at 3:17 a.m. Certain of something. He didn't know what. Only that something in the museum was no longer alone. And that it knew his name. Daniel Hartwick. Waiting for you. Waiting to be unwrapped. Except there was no machinery in the west wing. Daniel set his calipers down. Listened. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. It had direction now. Movement with intent. He told himself it was thermal expansion, metal reacting to cold. The radiator system was unreliable. Pipes ran through the walls like exposed veins. Scrape. Closer. He stood. The restoration room suddenly felt too small. Too sealed. He crossed to the door and opened it. The museum beyond lay in darkness. Only the emergency exit signs cast their weak red glow, bleeding into the polished wood floors. He stepped into the hallway. The air smelled different. Not dust. Not paper. Animal. The sound came again. From the west wing. Scrape. Pause. He walked toward it before he could stop himself. Each step slow. Measured. Professional. He passed the glass cases of agricultural tools, rusted plows, iron traps, objects that had once imposed human will on wild things. Now they reflected him back in fragments. He reached the archway to the west wing. Stopped. The medieval display stood at the far end. Suits of armor arranged in silent ranks. Helmets empty. Watching. He waited. Nothing moved. He exhaled. And then, one of the helmets turned. Just slightly. A movement so small it might have been imagination. But he had seen it. He was certain. He walked closer. The armor stood on its platform. Motionless. The halberd in its gauntleted hand rested against its shoulder. Exactly as it had that afternoon. Exactly. No, not exactly. The angle was wrong. By degrees. He stepped closer still. His reflection warped across the polished breastplate. Behind him, something moved. He spun. Nothing. Empty museum. Silent. He turned back. The helmet now faced him directly. Daniel's breath caught. He stared into its black visor. Darkness stared back. Deeper. Hungry. Waiting. A sound came from behind him again. Not metal this time. Softer. Closer. Breathing. He turned slowly. The hallway behind him stretched empty to the restoration room. But the door he'd left open was closed. He knew he hadn't closed it. He was certain. His heart began to pound. He walked back toward it, each step heavier, the air thicker, the vibration stronger now. He felt it through the floor, through his legs, through his teeth. He reached the door. His hand trembled as he grasped the handle. Cold. He opened it. The restoration room waited exactly as he'd left it. Table, lamp, notes, and the coyote hide. It was no longer lying flat. It lay curved, raised slightly at one end, as if something inside had shifted position. Daniel stood frozen. His mind supplied explanations. Memory error, air pressure, structural settling. He stepped closer. Slowly, carefully, he reached out, touched the fur. Warm, not imagined, not subjective. Warm. He snatched his hand back. The hide moved. A twitch, small, but undeniable. Daniel staggered backward. His shoulder hit the wall. The hide settled again. Still, silent, waiting. His breath came in shallow bursts. He stared at it. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Finally, he forced himself forward. Forced himself to act, to document, to understand. He picked up his camera, raised it, his hands shaking. He zoomed in. Through the lens, the fur shifted again. And beneath it, something pressed outward. From inside, a shape, long, narrow, like fingers, pushing against skin, trying to find a way out. Daniel dropped the camera. It hit the floor with a crack. The hide went still, completely still, as if it had never moved at all, as if it had never been anything more than an artifact. Across the room, something inhaled, and Daniel realized, with sudden, sick certainty, it hadn't come from the hide. It had come from behind him. Daniel did not sleep that night. He lay flat on his back, staring at the ceiling while truck headlights dragged pale bars of light across the plaster, like slow prison searches. His mind refused to be still. It circled the same impossible detail. Warmth. Animal hide did not hold warmth after a century. It did not breathe. It did not pulse. And yet, he shut his eyes, opened them again. Morning came without rest. He arrived at the museum before sunrise. The building waited for him in silence, brick darkened with dew, windows black and unreadable. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, stopped. The air had changed. It carried that smell again. Sweet, rotting, perfume, old roses. And beneath it, something human, unwashed skin, fear. He followed it, down the east corridor, toward the Victorian exhibit. The display stood undisturbed. Glass case, mannequin, dress, ivory silk yellowed with age. He leaned closer. The smell was stronger here, clinging, fresh. His eyes traced the fabric, the waist, the sleeves, the neckline. He froze. The position was wrong. He had cataloged this dress himself 2 months ago. The hands had been folded neatly. Proper, passive. Now, one arm hung slightly lower, as if gravity had claimed it, or as if it had moved. He stood very still, waited. Nothing happened. He laughed softly. Once, embarrassed, reached for his clipboard, made a note. Possible mount instability. Requires adjustment. He turned to leave. Behind him, fabric whispered. He spun. The mannequin stood as before. Perfect. Still. But the smell. Stronger. He left the exhibit. Faster than he meant to. He went straight to the restoration room. He needed normalcy. Documentation. Control. He opened the door. Stopped. The archival tube lay on the table, where he had left it. But the cap was loose. His pulse quickened. He was certain he had sealed it. Certain. He approached slowly, each step careful. Measured. He reached out, touched the tube. Warm. He pulled his hand back, stared at it. No. Impossible. He grasped the cap, twisted. It slid free with no resistance. Inside, empty. Daniel's breath vanished. He tipped the tube. Nothing fell out. No hide. No fur. Nothing. His mind rejected it. He searched the table, the floor, the shelves. Nothing. The hide was gone. Behind him, something moved. Soft. Deliberate. He turned. The mask lay on the table, outside its box. He knew he had packed it away. He knew. It faced him. Its dark eye holes deeper now. Wider. Watching. He stepped back. His heel struck something. He looked down. Footprints. On the floor. Dirt. Fresh. Animal prints. Too large for coyote. Too narrow for wolf. They led. Away from the table. Toward the open door. Toward the museum. Toward freedom. Daniel's mouth went dry. A sound came from the hallway. Not metal. Not building. Breathing. Slow. Patient. Waiting. And then, footsteps. Not human. Not animal. Something in between. Moving on legs that remembered both. Daniel stood frozen, understanding at last. The bundle had never been storage. It had been restraint. And he had opened the cage. Frank didn't speak again until they were well inside. The museum was still half asleep, its long hallways dim and hollow, holding onto the night. Their footsteps echoed faintly against the polished floors, each sound swallowed too quickly by the surrounding silence. Daniel noticed Frank wasn't walking at his usual steady pace. He was slower, reluctant, like a man approaching something he didn't want to see twice. They passed the main exhibit hall. Glass cases stood in silent rows, their contents frozen in time. Ancient tools, ceremonial objects, fragments of lives that no longer existed, or were not supposed to. Frank stopped outside the conservation room. His hand hovered near the door handle. For a moment, he didn't move. "Frank," Daniel said quietly. Frank swallowed. "I didn't want to write this down," he said. His voice was tight, strained. "Didn't want it on paper." Daniel felt a faint irritation, sharpened by lack of sleep. "What is it?" Frank didn't answer. He just opened the door. The conservation room smelled faintly of dust and treated leather. Everything looked exactly as Daniel had left it the night before. The table, the instruments, the bundle. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes scanning automatically for damage, disturbance, contamination. He froze. The hide had moved, Not far, not dramatically, but enough. Enough that he knew, without any doubt, that it was no longer lying in the same position he had carefully placed it. A cold sensation crept into his chest. "That's not possible," he said. Frank didn't reply. Daniel turned. Frank was staring at the hide with an expression Daniel had never seen on his face before. Not confusion, not curiosity, recognition, and fear. "I locked this room myself," Frank said quietly. Daniel forced a rational explanation into place. "You must be mistaken." Frank didn't argue. He only said 4 words. "It wasn't alone." Daniel felt something inside him shift. A small, fragile certainty beginning to crack. "Frank," he said carefully, "what do you mean?" Frank hesitated, then spoke. "When I came in this morning, it wasn't lying flat." He paused. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. It looked like it was breathing. Their footsteps sounded wrong. Not louder, not softer, just wrong. The sound didn't bounce the way it should have. It sank into the walls, absorbed by the building as if the museum itself were listening. Frank walked ahead with measured caution. Not nervous, careful, like a man who understood that familiar places could change when no one was looking. He didn't try to fill the silence. Daniel respected that. Frank had always treated the museum as more than a workplace. He moved through it like a caretaker, not an employee. Like someone who believed it deserved respect. They turned into the Hall of Natural History. The overhead lights flickered faintly before settling. The old exhibit stood frozen behind glass, unchanged for decades. At the center, the pronghorn antelope remained locked in its eternal leap. Frank stopped in front of it, pointed down. Daniel followed his finger and felt his stomach tighten. Tracks. They cut across the polished wooden floor in a straight, deliberate line. From the entrance to the display case, then away again, toward the restoration wing. Daniel crouched slowly, his pulse quickening despite himself. 4 toes, clawed, canine, but wrong. Too large to belong to any dog, too narrow to belong to any wolf. And the spacing, it suggested something that didn't walk, something that loped, something built for distance. And they were clear, sharp, pressed into a floor that had been polished smooth just 2 days ago. Daniel stared at them, his mind scrambling for something reasonable. Someone brought a dog inside. That was the logical answer. Except, no dog left tracks like these, and no dog could enter a locked building without triggering the alarm. "I checked," Frank said quietly. Daniel looked up. "The logs are clean. Alarm never tripped." Frank gestured toward the doors behind them. Everything was still locked from the inside. His voice grew quieter. "I was here until midnight. Place was empty." A pause. "I came back at 6. His eyes returned to the tracks. They were already here. Daniel stood, brushing his hands against his pants. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "An animal got in somehow." He gestured vaguely. "Basement maybe, broken window." Frank nodded, but he didn't believe it. Daniel could see it in his eyes. Frank looked at the tracks again, careful not to step too close. "I've worked here 20 years, he said. His voice held no panic, only certainty. "I've never seen tracks like these. A beat, and I've never seen anything get past those locks." There was something else in his tone. Not fear, recognition, respect, the kind given to something you don't understand. but no better than to dismiss. Daniel told himself it was superstition, local folklore, nothing more. But he noticed something he couldn't explain. Frank had never touched the tracks, had never stepped near them. He kept the same precise distance, as if he understood. They did not belong to an animal, as if getting closer would be a mistake. After Frank left, Daniel stayed behind. Alone, he forced himself into routine. Routine meant control. Control meant safety. He photographed the tracks carefully. Every angle, every indentation, every claw mark pressed into the polished floor. Through the camera lens, they looked even worse. More deliberate, less like wandering, more like intention. They led straight toward his restoration room. Daniel followed them slowly, his footsteps careful, measured. The tracks stopped directly in front of his door. He froze. Something had stood there, waiting. He could see it in the spacing, in the depth of the impressions. Whatever it was, it hadn't passed by. It had paused, watching. He swallowed, forced himself to keep moving. The tracks continued down the corridor, toward the administrative wing, toward the emergency exit. He reached the door, tested it, locked, still secured from the inside. No damage, no tampering, no explanation, just an ending, as if whatever had made the tracks had simply stopped existing. The rest of the morning dissolved into procedure. Reports, checklists, perimeter inspections. Frank searched the basement. Nothing. No broken windows. No entry point. No animal. No answers. By noon, Daniel's mind did what minds do best. It protected him. There had to be a logical explanation. Something living in the walls. Something hiding in the attic. Something small enough to escape notice. Something normal. Something safe. He clung to that thought. Returned to his restoration room. Returned to the mask. Returned to the work he understood. He began cleaning it. Soft brush. Distilled water. Gentle. Precise. The dust came away easily, revealing wood beneath. Perfect wood. Too perfect. It should have shown decay. Weakness. Age. But it didn't. It looked preserved. Better than preserved. Alive. Daniel leaned closer, examining the interior carving. His fingers hovered above the surface. He noticed tool marks, stone, and metal. His brow furrowed. That was impossible. Objects from this period shouldn't show both. Not unless. He stopped that thought, kept working, measured, photographed, documented. But the longer he studied it, the stranger it became. The grain ran wrong, against its own structure, in directions wood should never allow. Yet it held, defying its own nature. His notes grew longer, more detailed. He found himself recording things that didn't matter. The exact angle of light inside the eye sockets, the wear pattern where a face might rest, the faint smell rising from the wood, cedar, and something else, something older, something warm, something biological. He leaned closer, breathing it in. His heart beat faster. He didn't know why. He measured the mask again, and again, 17 times. Each result identical, each result impossible. He stared into the hollow eye sockets. and felt something deeply uncomfortable. Not the feeling of studying an object, but the feeling of being studied back. His hands kept writing long after they should have stopped, as if the pen didn't belong to him anymore. 23 pages. 23 pages for a single mask. It was excessive, unnecessary, wrong. He told himself it was professionalism, diligence, but his fingers trembled. Twice he had to stop. Twice he had to pry the pen loose from his own grip. His muscles cramped around something they didn't want to release. Still, he continued, because stopping felt worse. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the tracks, remembering Helen, remembering the warning. By the time Frank knocked to say goodnight, Daniel barely looked up. The words registered, but the meaning didn't. Soon the museum was empty, completely empty, just how Daniel liked it. Silence, control, isolation. The mask sat before him, waiting. Its hollow eyes reflected the fluorescent lights, but not correctly. There was depth there, too much depth, like something stood behind the wood, looking out, through it, at him. He photographed it again, measured the eye sockets, measured the mouth, measured everything. Anything to stay occupied, anything to avoid looking directly into its gaze. The sound had been happening for a while before he noticed it. A scrape, pause, scrape, pause, slow, heavy, stone against stone. Daniel froze. His clock read 9:30 p.m. He was alone. The sound continued. Patient, deliberate, something moving that should not move. He stood. His back screamed in protest. The scraping stopped. Instantly, the silence that followed was worse. The entire building felt like it was listening, waiting. Then, crash. The sound exploded through the museum. Heavy, final. Something massive had fallen. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. He stepped into the hallway. The motion lights flickered on one by one, illuminating artifacts, frozen faces, dead history. Watching him pass, the Victorian dress stood in its case, its empty chest facing him, its posture wrong. He walked faster. The air grew heavier, thicker, harder to breathe. Pressure built inside his ears, inside his skull, and beneath it, that vibration, that same vibration. He could feel it in his bones. Something was awake. He reached the Egyptian gallery and stopped. The sarcophagus was on the floor. It hadn't fallen. It had been thrown. The platform remained upright. The bolts that secured it were bent, not broken. Bent, like soft wire. Daniel stepped closer. The lid had cracked open. Darkness waited inside. Not empty darkness. Occupied darkness. Something behind him moved. Daniel turned and saw it. His mind refused to understand. It was too wrong, too fluid, too unstable. Dog, wolf, coyote, none of them. All of them. Its body flickered between shapes, like reality couldn't hold it properly. Its eyes reflected the light, but there was intelligence there, ancient intelligence, and fear. It wasn't looking at him. It was looking at the sarcophagus. Terrified, it made a sound. Not a growl, not a bark, A whine, a warning. Then it ran. Vast, faster than anything its size should move. It circled the sarcophagus, panicking, desperate, like it knew, like it understood what was coming. Daniel's breath caught, because in that moment, he realized something impossible. The thing wasn't the threat. The thing was afraid of it, had left it locked. The cold draft from the hallway whispered across his skin like the warning he had ignored. Inside, everything was out of place. The archival boxes lay scattered, their lids open. Tissue paper fluttered like frightened birds. The tools of the hunter, the mask, the herbs, the obsidian blade, the bundle of quills, had been removed from their compartments and arranged across the table, but not neatly, not for cataloging. They had been positioned deliberately as though someone, or something, had been preparing a ritual he could barely comprehend. Daniel froze. His pulse hammered in his ears, a frantic drum that matched the vibration in the walls. And then he heard it, a soft scrape, wet and deliberate, coming from the corner of the room he had thought empty. He turned slowly. The hide lay on the floor now, unfolded, its fur shimmering with impossible vitality. It shifted, not like an animal, not like a thing, but like a presence, sentient and aware, adjusting its posture to regard him. The mask hovered near it as though suspended by intent rather than gravity. Daniel's rational mind screamed for explanation. Drafts, mechanical failures, hallucination. But his eyes told him otherwise. Something alive, something ancient, something bound to a purpose older than memory was standing before him. It had not attacked, not yet. It was assessing, waiting, calculating. Then the scraping started again, from somewhere deeper in the museum, the medieval hall, then the Victorian wing, then back toward the Egyptian gallery. Each sound a sentence he could not read. Each movement a word of warning in a language his mind refused to translate. And the hide, it moved closer to him now, slowly, deliberately. The warmth he had felt in the museum months ago radiating outward, more pronounced, undeniable. It was aware of him. Daniel stepped backward, knocking over a small box. He expected an attack, expected chaos. Nothing came, just the presence. A pressure in the room, a rhythm, a heartbeat that was not his own but that matched his fear, his racing pulse. And then he understood with the clarity of someone who has glimpsed the wrong side of eternity. The bundle, the mask, the tools, the herbs, the hides, they were not just instruments. They were instructions. The hunter, awakened incomplete, was attempting to reconstruct its bindings, to restore what he had dismantled. And if it failed, if it could not complete the ritual, everything else in the museum, everything preserved, everything silent, would awaken too. Daniel's hand hovered over the nearest container. He knew what he had to do, but as he reached for it, the hide twitched, coiling like a living thing preparing to spring, and the mask lifted slightly from the table, its hollow eyes locking onto his. Not with malice, not with aggression, with recognition. And Daniel finally understood the tribal elder's warning. He had not opened a bundle of artifacts. He had opened a gate, and whatever had been waiting behind it was beginning to move. Responsibility. He could not run. He could not leave. Every instinct screamed to flee, but his mind, the part honed on centuries of artifacts, preservation, containment, knew what had to be done. He had opened the gate. He had separated the tools. Now he had to reassemble them, reconstruct the compact, restore the hunter before it completed its own version of the work, unbound, incomplete, uncontrolled. The corridor ahead stretched like a tunnel into an impossible dark, walls vibrating with the quiet pulse of movement behind every door, within every display case. Shadows shifted at the edges of his vision, silhouettes that should not exist, creatures in impossible forms, watching, waiting, measuring him. The scream echoed again, a high-pitched keening, and this time it carried through the ventilation ducts, through the building's bones, a sound older than wood and brick, older than the artifacts themselves. Daniel ran, not toward an exit, but toward the restoration room. He had to reach the archival containers. He had to retrieve the scattered components. Each step was met with resistance. a pressure in the air that slowed him, as if the building itself were aware of his purpose, aware that he was trying to impose order on forces older than order. He reached the room's threshold. Darkness pressed against him. The smell, cedar, sage, and that unnameable vitality, was thick now, almost choking. He crouched, hands trembling, and began pulling the containers together. He arranged the obsidian blade, the quills, the herbs, the mask, the hide, as they had been before he dismantled them. His mind raced through the steps the tribal elders had hinted at: placement, alignment, respect, acknowledgement. He did not fully understand the ritual, but the academic part of him, the part that demanded order and completeness, knew that precision, intention, and sequence were everything. And then the hide twitched. It moved on its own, curling, stretching, reacting to his touch. Daniel's pulse hit a peak, but he did not stop. He aligned the mask over the hide, placed the quills and tools around it in their proper formation, and whispered aloud the words that had no translation, words remembered from the elder's warning, words of binding, respect, and acknowledgement. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the scrape of metal on stone from the medieval hall stopped. The rustle in the Victorian collection ceased. Even the low vibration that had pressed into his chest went still. He dared to look at the hide. It had folded itself neatly, settled, dormant again, but its vitality remained palpable, a quiet hum of power restrained. Daniel sank to the floor, hands on the cool table, realizing that the museum had not been merely a building. It had been a cage, a boundary, a carefully maintained hunting ground for something older, wiser, and far more patient than he could imagine. He had been careless. He had released it, but now, with trembling precision, he had restored the compact, if only temporarily. He looked around the darkened room. Silence reigned. The air still carried that strange, vital warmth, but the predator was contained again, waiting, patient. And Daniel knew, with the full weight of guilt and understanding, that the museum would never be the same. Neither would he. The hunter slept, but it was no longer a bundle on a table. It was alive in every corner of the building, in every artifact he had cataloged, and Daniel understood, finally, that some knowledge came with a price. Some responsibility could not be delegated. Some warnings were not optional. And he had been warned. Errors that rendered the pieces unstable. No mention was made of claw marks, scratches, or shattered displays. No press release hinted at anything unusual, though the staff whispered of strange sounds in the dead hours and objects moving on their own. Daniel Hartwick was never seen again. Some said he had left quietly, moved on to another museum, perhaps driven mad by his discovery. Others whispered that he had become part of the work he had unleashed, a permanent observer, or even a participant in the hunter's ongoing ritual. Frank Yazy, now the senior staff member, never mentioned the incident publicly. He kept the leather pouch hidden in his desk, and the last page of Daniel's log he kept folded in his jacket pocket. Occasionally, he would catch a faint smell of cedar or sage in the hallways, and he would pause, remembering the warmth, the vital presence of something that should not exist. Visitors returned to the museum, unaware of what had unfolded. They marveled at ancient artifacts, admired the medieval armor, and saw only what the museum allowed them to see. But Frank knew. The building was no longer just a museum. It was a hunting ground, a space carefully negotiated between the seen and unseen. And sometimes, in the quietest hours, the hunter still moved. It worked silently, invisibly, maintaining the balance that Daniel Hartwick had almost destroyed. And Frank, now the reluctant custodian of both the museum and its secret, would never forget the words scrawled on that final page. "It knows what I am called." The hunter knew, and it waited. Had almost destroyed the very order he sought to protect. He wondered if Daniel had understood, even in his final moments, that some knowledge came with a price too great to bear. But Frank did not dwell on it. There was work to be done in the quiet hours when the museum was empty, when the hunter moved among the collections, unseen but deliberate. The building itself seemed different now, attuned to the presence that Daniel had awakened. Lights flickered with a subtle rhythm, cases that once stood rigid now shifted imperceptibly, and the air sometimes carried the faint tang of cedar and sage, as if the hunter left traces of itself behind. Frank did not fear it. Respect was enough. Awareness, patience, and letting the work unfold in its own time. Visitors returned, oblivious to the subtle shifts in the museum's pulse. They admired the artifacts, unaware that some objects had been removed entirely, that others now bore marks that no restoration could erase. The hunter's work was invisible to them, deliberate and silent, restoring balance in ways the human eye could not perceive. Frank sometimes caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of his eye, a shadow slinking between cases, a flicker across a window, a disturbance in the dust that suggested life where there should have been none. He never approached it. He merely watched, recorded what he could, and ensured the museum remained a place where history could be seen, but not necessarily understood. And the hunter continued. It worked methodically, silently, reclaiming what had never belonged to humanity, maintaining the delicate boundary between what should be known and what should remain contained. Frank had become the reluctant witness to a truth the world could never be told, that the museum was no longer merely a place of preservation. It was a hunting ground, a carefully balanced ecosystem of objects, energies, and guardianship. And some things were not meant to be understood, only acknowledged and left undisturbed. Frank moved through the museum with careful steps, each footfall measured, each glance deliberate. He understood the rules now, the unspoken hierarchy between human and guardian. Some things could be seen but not touched. Some things could be documented only from a distance. The hunter had restored order in its own way, reshaping the museum according to logic humans could not hope to grasp. The galleries seemed calmer now, though the absence of certain displays was conspicuous only to those who remembered them. The pronghorn antelope was gone, replaced by emptiness patterned with ritual traces. The Victorian dress, the medieval armor, the Egyptian sarcophagus, these had been moved, removed, or returned to the earth from which they had never fully belonged to human hands. Frank passed the restoration wing without pause. The doors were closed, the lights off, but he could sense the presence behind them. The faint smell of cedar and sage lingered in the air, a reminder that the hunter was always watching, always tending, always patient. It would continue its work in silence, beyond the reach of alarms, security logs, or human understanding. He thought of Daniel, of the man who had opened the bundle with certainty, who had believed in the supremacy of knowledge over caution, and he understood in a quiet, unshakable way that some lessons were learned too late. Some mistakes could not be undone. Some custodianship belonged to forces older than museums, older than archives, older than human memory. Frank continued his rounds, the building settling around him, aware that he was merely a witness now. He kept his distance, made his notes, and acknowledged the work being done by something beyond comprehension. Some doors were better left closed. Some rooms were better left empty. Some knowledge was meant to remain unclaimed. And in the silence of the old museum, between the floors and the walls, the hunter worked, and the world remained just a little safer because of it.